I am now happy to announce that there will be no income tax payable up to income of 12 lakh rupees. I propose to 1. Remove 7 tariff rates. This is over and above the 7 tariff rates removed in 23-24 budget. The revised estimate of the fiscal deficit is 4.8% of the GDP.
ये बजट एक फोर्स मल्टीप्लायर है। ये बजट सेविंग्स को बढ़ाएगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट को बढ़ाएगा, कंजम्पशन को बढ़ाएगा और ग्रोथ को भी तेजी से बढ़ाएगा।
ये भारत सरकार का बजट है कि बिहार सरकार का बजट है? आपने बिहार के अलावा किसी और प्रदेश का नाम सुना वित्त मंत्री जी के पूरे बजट भाषण में?
The infrastructure is not going for the rest of the country. It's only going towards Bihar because we all know that this year is the Bihar election. So basically, for essence, and Maharashtra has been ignored, and Tamil Nadu, there's not a single word for Tamil Nadu or for any other southern states.
Tax sweeteners for the middle class, a firm hold on fiscal consolidation and continuity on capex. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman's 8th consecutive budget aims to give a fillip to consumption by putting money in the hands of the middle class. Also, as they say, no news is good news. For the markets, it is status quo as there is no change on capital gains. It wasn't expected. The big headline is the change in the income tax slabs. The government will forego 1 lakh crore rupees in direct tax revenues this year. That is the big story. That is the big headlines. As we've been pointing out, the 3 C's that the government intended to focus on, the prioritization has changed. It is consumption, capex and consolidation that the government has taken forward. We're now joined by Ratin Roy, Distinguished Professor at the Kautilya School of Public Policy. Also with us, N.K. Singh, Chairperson of the 15th Finance Commission, and Surjit Bhalla, former Executive Director for India at the IMF. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Mr. Singh, let me come to you first, sir. As I pointed out, it's the 3 C's: consumption, capex and consolidation. The government clearly prioritizing consumption this time around.
So I think that, Shireen, that's not such a bad thing. If sharp changes in the income tax slab leaves higher disposable income in the hands of an average taxpayer, that has virtuous cycles in terms of what that higher disposable income is likely to do by boosting demand and consumption in the economy. But as you pointed out, this has been done along, even though this really meant foregoing 1 lakh crores of revenue on taxes. This is not asymmetrical to the path of fiscal consolidation, which has been outlined rather clearly in the macroeconomic policy statement. I've heard many commentaries casting doubts on the government's commitment of fiscal consolidation and in terms of debt. But if one looks at page 12 of the macroeconomic policy statement, one finds that the fiscal deficit, having reached over 9% in 2021, is planning to come down to 4.4% in terms of the budget proposals, a fairly sharp contraction in the fiscal deficit. Equally, since we know that the investor community, particularly rating agencies, are very interested in the path of the debt and debt to GDP, the debt trajectory, which is also outlined there, really projects that debt to GDP of the central government will come down to just over 50% by 2031, of course, if there are no disruptions of an unusual kind which take place. Now, therefore, both in terms of the fiscal record and the fiscal consolidation, and in terms of the debt coming down in a significant southward direction, is a very strong signal to rating agencies, to the investor community, that macroeconomic stability has not been compromised, notwithstanding the far-reaching changes which have been taken place in the direct taxes, coupled with the fact that next week we are likely to see the new tax laws, which are going to be simpler, cleaner, more easily understood by an average assessee. And it will therefore give meaning and content to faceless assessment. She has also outlined proposals of how to bring down the multiple assessments which are pending in appeals of various kinds. So if one takes such a holistic view of that, one finds that there are very significant changes which have been outlined in the budget.
Significant changes outlined in the budget, and particularly as far as the fiscal consolidation roadmap is concerned, a credible roadmap being presented. That's the view coming in from NK Singh. But let me bring Surjit Bhalla into the conversation. Surjit Bhalla, many thanks. You were on the program yesterday when we were discussing the economic survey, and you were an advocate for the government to move on consumption and provide tax relief, and that's exactly what they've done. Surjit Bhalla, your headline for Budget 2025.
Look, I will break my headlines into two components. The non-tax component, which is the calling card of this budget, and the tax component. On the non-tax component, I think every sound, every bite, every policy was very, very welcome and in the right direction. So not a single discordant note. I had thought the same thing about the tax, because it was something that I've been arguing, many others have been arguing, and finally there was delivery. Until one looks at the fine print, and maybe NK can clarify this, I don't know how much will be clarified and perhaps made right in the tax bill, which will be introduced next week. The problem is as follows. That I see as follows. Until 12 lakhs, there's no, forget the 75,000, until 12 lakhs, there is no tax. But if you earn 12 lakhs and 1 rupee, you will pay 60,000 rupees of tax, because the initial slab, which in all countries of the world is where the tax schedule starts, but the initial slab in India is 0 to 4 lakhs. So 0 to 4 lakhs, you don't pay anything. 4 to 8 lakhs, you pay 5%, and 8 to 12 lakhs, you pay 10%. So NK, is this correct? That there is no marginal whatever, as every other country does, and as India has done until the new tax law was brought in. So maybe this is what the tax bill will clarify. Assume the tax bill makes this right. This is the most superb budget I could have imagined. Absolutely. And, I have compared it, will this be a 1991 moment? But, 1991 was a huge crisis. So if this is as reform-oriented and given that our growth rate, bad enough as it is, it's 6.4%, it's not possible to have a 1991 moment. Again, thank you very much, because you don't want a 1991, pre-1991 situation. But if it is not if it is as it is stated to be, then I think it's very disturbing, and I hope that the government will reconsider. So NK, is the new tax bill going to make this right? Or am my understanding, I hope my understanding of the whole situation is wrong.
Well,
Mr. Singh?
Surjit, yes. Well, Surjit, I would urge you, notwithstanding your domain understanding, that why not wait and see the fine print, since next week is not too far away, and see the fine print in the new tax proposals. But I think that you have complimented not only the government, but the finance minister as a very far-reaching sort of changes. I myself, although I have been part of the Ministry of Finance for very long and had done the last big simplification of the income tax in a very significant way, when I really am applauding the fact that really this is taking a hit of 1 lakh crore is not small. Because by taking a hit of 1 lakh crore, one would have expected, Surjit, that the FIS would have gone through the roof and that the debt would have gone further northwards. But if you look at the two as symmetrically, both the hit on the revenue side, along with the consistency and the symmetry on the overall macroeconomic framework, I think that you are right that in some ways this is a very far-reaching budget, even though India is not undergoing the kind of balance of payments crisis which we all know in 1991. And this is one of the first time, therefore, that this kind of a far-reaching reform has taken place without a crisis. And that is something which we need to certainly applaud.
I'll come back to come back to you, Surjit, in just a second. Yes, Mr. Singh, go ahead.
Yeah. One other, which is not part of the budget, but is part of the announcement, which is also going to be far-reaching, and which is on FDI and BITS, that there is a new wording of the BITS law, and that is something that will also be far-reaching in terms of investment, in terms of growth, in terms of technology. We have to await that, but I think it'll come soon. So the sound bites as well as the direction is all in the right direction. I just hope, so I agree with NK. I'm going to wait just a few more days. But if it is as we expect, it's a fantastic occasion for India. And this will propel the growth rate also upwards. And NK, you're very right. You know, what's this problem with more consumption? BIT,
I did ask the Economic Affairs Secretary, and he said that it is work in progress, but they are certainly addressing some of the issues that you spoke of, but he didn't want to be drawn into the specifics just yet. Rathin Roy also here with me, waiting by. Rathin, you've heard both Mr. NK Singh as well as Surjit Bhalla, and we've been having this conversation. You do believe that the numbers are credible. Finally, on going over the fine print and the details, the assessment.
Well, as they say in French, plus ça change, même chose, which is that, look, since 2016, apart from the COVID years, expenditure of the government of India has been shrinking. And for the last 3 years, tax GDP ratios are stagnant. Therefore, the entire fiscal discipline that the central government has it's got through expenditure cuts. Broadly speaking, they cut the fiscal deficit by 0.5% of GDP every year, and then they cut expenditure by 0.5% of GDP every year. That's what's happened this year. 1 lakh crores in terms of the income tax cut is not a very large number. And I think Mr. Singh is absolutely right. It is consistent with maintaining fiscal prudence, except for one worry I have. Finance Ministry has a tendency to underestimate revenue foregone. I looked up what happened with the corporate tax cuts in 2019. They said 1 lakh crores then. Ultimately, according to experts, the tax cut was about 3 lakh crores.
Okay.
So if that happens, then all this hard-won fiscal responsibility, which I commend and encourage, will be jeopardized. And therefore, I really do hope that a ministry that is not very good at predicting tax numbers, at least this time gets it right. I think the big reform that I like, and really, I mean, giving reforms to the top 10% of the population in the hope of increasing expenditure. Look at it another way. Are we saying that people who earn less than 6 times the per capita income are not prosperous enough to pay income tax? It's something worth thinking about for viewers. I mean, what kind of society do we live in where people earning 6 times the per capita income, it's only then that you start paying income tax. So there is a prosperity problem in India, and what the budget has done is acknowledged it, by no means resolved it. The good thing the budget has done, I think the best thing it's done for doing business in India, is announced that next week, and I was very pleased the finance minister said this, there will be a tax bill that will harmonize and improve on our legislation, and she's promised that that bill will cut the clutter by half. My God. Yeah. If that doesn't do something for lifting confidence in India and in the business community, I don't know what will. That's much better than all this bakhana business and all that. And by the way, I do hope Dr. Singh is happy that there was so much Bihar in this budget. I've never seen so much Bihar in this budget.
No, so that point is well taken. As far as the tax code is concerned, the finance minister has promised that it will be half the size of the existing tax code. And, you know, many tax experts here on the program were joking with me, saying that we might be out of a job. We might be out of a job at the end of it. But you know, Mr. Singh, coming back to reforms as well as the center-state compact, if I may articulate it in that fashion, you know, whether we talk about capex, we talk about the national manufacturing policy, we talk about the index that they intend to put out as far as competitiveness is concerned, you know, the additional grants to states, of course, linked to caveats. How do you see this new center-state compact as well as the revival of PPP, bringing back public-private partnership, which is the stated objective in this budget?
So I think that, Shri, allow me to make just first 2 or 3 very quick comments on what Surjit said and what Ratin also said. Well, Surjit, I think that one additional factor of reform which I'm sure you would like to consider is that, you know, all of us have applauded for very good reasons the most important contribution of late Dr. Manmohan Singh in the Indo-US nuclear pact which he was able to arrive at. And that, I think, was, given the difficulties, was a very, very important contribution. But the fact remains that because of the impediments of various laws relating to insurance, we were not able to harness any private sector investment in the entire area of the civil use of nuclear energy. This bill, this budget, clears that great cobweb away, and that I regard as an important reform, because that as we go forward, as we adopt more and more of artificial intelligence, we must recognize that this is very energy-intensive activity. We need to find clean sources of renewable energy, and the direction given in the budget on the reform of the use of atomic energy, modular atomic plants, and the changes which will enable private sector investment to come in this is a very, very important reform. Sujit, I totally agree with you that since you were part of the FRBM Act, which we both did together, that we must recognize the fact that with no fiscal crisis looming around, with no issues of serious macroeconomic stability, voluntarily a fairly credible path of fiscal consolidation has been outlined, as also the fact on the debt. Because, you know, you and I, if you recall, had done a lot in making the changes in the new FRBM Act, where we wanted debt to become the principal macroeconomic anchor, and that the government accepted. In that pursuance of that, the downward south trajectory on the debt is a very, very important, which has been outlined in some detail in the macroeconomic policy statement. To your point, Shireen, yes, I totally agree with you. In no other recent budget do I recall the mention not only a public-private partnership, as you said, but in so many ways the mention of a partnership with the states. In partnership with the states has repeatedly figured in several of the announcements made by the finance minister. I think this augurs well, because we all believe that not only in regard to debt and in regard to fiscal deficits, but in the multiple areas, the partnership with the states and meaningful partnership with the states will be a very important fulcrum of change as we go forward.
Sujit, Ratan, you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that while on the partnerships with the states points, in the afternoon I was talking to some of the governments in South India, and they're not very happy. they view this attempt to impose policy conditionalities on them as being unnecessary if you're South Indian. I told them this is probably for the Bibaru states.
Yeah.
But they, for example, one chief minister, I live in Hyderabad, you can guess who said this, one of two, one finance minister said to me, who are they to tell us about global capability centers? We get them here. They don't come to us because the government, he's actually said Delhi Sultanate, tells us how to do these things. So I think this budget did come across to the more prosperous states, the economically more dynamic states, as slightly patronizing.
Okay, Surjit Bala, back to you on some of the reform measures that were articulated by both Ratin as well as Mr. Singh, but on capex, and I had Vinay Chatterjee in a short while ago, and his point is that are we moving away from the stated objective of pump priming the economy by way of infrastructure investment, and has there now been a shift towards consumption, and what that augurs as far as the long-term economic policy making is concerned? Would you agree that this signals a shift, perhaps?
Look, I've maintained, and every economist has maintained, that one of the best policies to get growth going in the initial stages of development is infrastructure. There's also something called diminishing returns. This government has a fantastic record on infrastructure and public investment in infrastructure over the last decade. And I think the time has come for a shift in gears. It doesn't mean that this is any loss. Even now, there's a fair amount of infrastructure investment. So that's point number one. I fully welcome this thrust towards more consumption, if you will, and more middle-class relief. I want to get to what Ratin has been saying, and perhaps you may have to have another session on this, but I haven't seen too many people argue that, listen, I have to look at the per capita income for my first slab and has to be a certain proportion to it. It's a bit technical, but we already are at one of the highest tax to GDP ratios in India. What would you like us to do? To increase the tax to GDP ratio even higher? Unless you're saying we should income tax and cut all other taxes. But I think the central point of any policymaker in any government, and we have an example of 190 countries, okay, over the last 75 years, we have data for that, is to contain taxation and provide, which is why we are one of the highest in the world. Our aggregate tax to GDP ratio is 19%, the same as in Korea, as in US. US is maybe at 20%. So what? And why is it that we have to look at the per capita income of Western countries in order to find out whether we are taxing too little, which is the implication of Ratin's statement? So I think this is recognizing, to answer Nashareen, this is recognizing that our growth story is investment and now consumption. You can't just keep on investing because unless your incomes are growing at a much rapid pace. The last point I want to make on this is our potential, before somebody says, listen, we are growing at 6% and that's good. No, we have to grow at our potential, not what somebody else's growth rate is. And our potential is very easily somewhere close to 8%. And we've done that, and we will do that. It is completely on the cards and in the forecast, if you will. But we need a couple of corrections, as every society, as every country does. And I think they are very much in that direction, but I'll wait till next week. But I think, and the minor point that I disagree with, and we've had this discussion with NK, I think debt is very important. And I don't think the fiscal deficit, I can see the linkage, NK, between fiscal deficits and debt. But, there comes a tide in the affairs of men when you start looking at things beyond the fiscal deficit. So therefore, on the affairs of countries, I'm not saying go to 10, 9%, 8%, 7%, but I think, give more tax relief and go to 4.8%, just fine.
Just fine. And I know you're not the only one who's been suggesting that, Surjit Bhalla, but the government deciding to stick with 4.4%. And of course, moving to debt to GDP provides them with fiscal flexibility, is what the Economic Affairs Secretary explained to me while he was here earlier on. But, yes, Ratin,
very quick point. I just want to actually, for a change, defend the government. I think Finance Secretary Somnathan very clearly said last year that this was the last year when you could expect the government to do heavy lifting on investment. This information has been conveyed very clearly to the private sector last year, very explicitly, and the year before that, slightly more implicitly. So I think it's very unfair to expect a government to do heavy lifting on investment when the private sector just sits there and rakes in sort of supernormal profits and doesn't do investing. Now the private sector has to step up to the plate. As far as what Surjit said, well, he has implicit growth rates and the deep state. So I must learn some economics from him on exactly why he thinks our tax is so high.
Well,
why fiscal consolidation is a bad idea.
We'll have to bring you back again on a longer show for a longer conversation, gentlemen. But Mr. Singh, I'm going to give you the final say, sir. As far as growth is concerned, and to the point that Surjit was making, and the point that the budget makers who were here with me in the studio a short while were making, they believe that they're now likely to be within grasp, in the words of the chief economic advisor, of the upper end of the estimate of 6.8%. But, that's good. Is it good enough? What should we aspire to from here on?
I lost her. I can't hear her.
Mr. Singh, can you hear me?
No, he can't.
Oh, we seem to have lost that line with him. We'll try and reconnect. But on growth, Surjit, very quickly, as we try and reconnect with Mr. Singh.
The employment story is very, very good. The growth story, India's growth story this decade has been, what has not been remembered or given enough credit for is that since 2010, our GDP growth rate has been higher than China on an average basis now for 14 years. We're doing good. I have no question that we are doing good. We can do superbly. It is in our hands. It is in our destiny. And it is in the likelihood that it will happen.
In our hands, in our destiny. Mr. Singh, the final comment from you on growth, sir, where this budget leaves us as far as growth aspirations are concerned. As I pointed out, budget makers now suggesting they feel confident of being able to get closer to the 6.8% estimate that the economic survey had held out. Within grasp is what the Economic Affairs Secretary said. But, where does that leave us from here on?
So, three very quick comments. First, on a lighter note, Surjit, I'm somewhat amused that given your domain expertise as the former executive director of the International Monetary Fund, which you served with great aplomb, you seem to really not really attach so much importance on adherence to the path of fiscal consolidation, on fiscal deficit and debt. Be that as it may, I do believe that the rest of the world, the investor community, particularly the rating agencies, and I urge you to really find out what happens in Basel every 2 months when all the governors of the central bank gather there to be informed about the progress of each country on the adherence to the fiscal consolidation and on the debt target. But I will leave that. Where I agree with you, Surjit, fully, is that there is no getting away that our real growth potential is closer to 8%, which is also necessary by the power of compounding. And considering that inflation is likely to be in the range of around 4 to 4.5%, giving you a nominal growth, therefore, of over 11.5, 12%, will bring us much closer to the realization of the kind of multipliers which will enable the dominant quest of every Indian to become a developed economy, somewhat closer on that trajectory. And therefore, sticking merely to this current nominal growth trajectory is really underestimating our potential. And on that note, Sujit, I fully agree and endorse that that must be our unrealized quest, the quest to become a Viksit Bharat by 2047.
Well, gentlemen, I have to say it has been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with the three of you. I cannot remember the last time that we've had such a conversation that's so rich on information, so rich on data, and so rich in terms of just being able to engage with one another in a civilized manner on television. You don't see this very often on Indian television anymore, but it's absolutely wonderful to see you, the three of you, engage in a fabulous debate and discussion on what the budget can and should do for the economy. N.K. Singh, Surjit Bhalla and Ratin Roy, many, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18 on Budget 2025 at the CNBC TV 18 Budget Headquarters. We're going to take a break. There's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment with more.
The medium term. However, our aspiration for a Viksit Bharat inspires us, and the transformative work we have done during our government's first 2 terms guides us to march forward resolutely. Our economy is the fastest growing among all major economies. Our development track record for the past 10 years and structural reforms have drawn global attention. Confidence in India's capability and potential has only grown in this period. We see the next 5 years as a unique opportunity to realize Sabka Vikas, stimulating balanced growth of all regions. The great Telugu poet and playwright Gurujada Apparao had said, Deshamante matti kadoy, Deshamante manushuloy, meaning a country is not just its soil, a country is its people. In line with this, for us, Viksit Bharat encompasses zero poverty, 100% quality good school education, access to high quality, affordable and comprehensive health care, 100% skilled labor with meaningful employment, 70% women in economic activities, and farmers making our country the food basket of the world. In this budget, the proposed development measures span 10 broad areas, focusing on Garib, Youth, Annadata, and Nari, spurring agricultural growth and productivity, building rural prosperity and resilience, taking everyone together on an inclusive growth path, boosting manufacturing and furthering Make in India, supporting MSMEs, enabling employment-led development, investing in people, economy, and innovation, securing energy supplies, promoting exports, and nurturing innovation. For this journey of development, our 4 powerful engines are agriculture, MSME, investments, and exports. The fuel, our reforms, our guiding spirit, inclusivity, and the destination, Viksit Bharat. This budget aims to initiate transformative reforms across 6 domains. During the first 5 years, these will augment our growth potential and global competitiveness. The domains are taxation, power sector, urban development, mining, financial sector, and regulatory reforms. Speaker, I present the budget for 25-26. government's efforts to A. Accelerate growth, B. Secure inclusive development, C. Invigorate private sector investments, D. Uplift household sentiments, and E. Enhance spending power of India's rising middle class. Together, we embark on a journey to unlock our nation's tremendous potential for greater prosperity and global positioning under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi. As we complete the first quarter of the 21st century, continuing geopolitical headwinds suggest lower global economic growth over the medium term. However, our aspiration for a Vikasit Bharat inspires us, and the transformative work we have done during our government's first 2 terms guides us to march forward resolutely. Our economy is the fastest growing among all major economies. Our development track record for the past 10 years and structural reforms have drawn global attention. Confidence in India's capability and potential has only grown in this period. We see the next 5 years as a unique opportunity to realize Sabka Vikas, stimulating balanced growth of all regions. The great Telugu poet and playwright Gurujada Appa Rao I am now happy to announce that there will be no income tax payable up to income of 12 lakh rupees. I propose to 1. Remove 7 tariff rates. This is over and above the 7 tariff rates removed in 23-24 budget. The revised estimate of the fiscal deficit is 4.8% of the GDP.
ये बजट एक फोर्स मल्टीप्लायर है। ये बजट सेविंग्स को बढ़ाएगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट को बढ़ाएगा, कंजम्पशन को बढ़ाएगा और ग्रोथ को भी तेजी से बढ़ाएगा।
ये भारत सरकार का बजट है कि बिहार सरकार का बजट है? आपने बिहार के अलावा किसी और प्रदेश का नाम सुना वित्त मंत्री जी के पूरे बजट भाषण में?
The infrastructure is not going for the rest of the country. It's only going towards BR because we all know that this year is the BR election. So basically, since Maharashtra has been ignored, and Tamil Nadu, there's not a single word for Tamil Nadu or for any other southern states.
Hello and welcome to our budget special. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has tried to give consumption a boost by putting money in the hands of the common man. The government will forego 1 lakh crore rupees in direct taxes in this year. The government's rationale is that the money is going to go into the hands of the people, and this will make its way into the economy. Apart from a tax sweetener for the middle class, firmness on fiscal consolidation, continuity on capex were the other key themes dominating the budget. Also, no news is good news for the markets as status quo is maintained on capital gains tax as was expected.
This is reflective of our government's trust on the middle class taxpayers. I am now happy to announce that there will be no income tax payable up to income of 12 lakh rupees.
There is nothing to cheer about the fact that the government has improved the fiscal deficit from the BE of 4.9% to the revised estimate of 4.8%. It was achieved at a huge cost to the economy. Those who did not believe us when we said that the economy is slowing down will, I hope, believe us now. Those who did not believe us that the capacity of the government to plan and implement schemes has diminished will, I hope, believe us now.
We're now joined by Syed Zafar Islam, National Spokesperson of the BJP, Sashmit Patra, Rajya Sabha MP from the Biju Janata Dal, also with us. Let me go across to Mr. Patra first of the Biju Janata Dal. Mr. Patra, how do you see this budget? The focus was on continuity, on improving the livelihoods of the middle class, putting more consumption power in their hands. How do you see the budget overall? Yes, the opposition has complained that this was a very Bihar-centric budget, but overall, do you feel that the government has been right in boosting consumption and putting money in the hands of the middle class? Do you think that will happen with this budget?
You see, this is a case of a missed opportunity. And why I say it's a case of missed opportunity is primarily because of two reasons. One, when you say that for the middle class, you are able to provide some kind of a benefit through such rebates, the middle class, essentially those who are getting about up to the threshold of 12 lakhs, would effectively be benefiting of about 60,000 per annum. Let's say that's the amount, which averages out to about 5,000 per month. If we were to look at the consumer inflation that is happening right now, the food inflation that is happening right now, there are no specific indications in this budget that specifies that inflation is going to be curtailed. So what you are essentially doing is the money that you are saying is going to stay in the hands of people, which will lead to a consumption demand, is actually going to be, in a way, get diluted within the framework of inflation itself. That's the first piece. The second, many a times we believe that income tax being provided a rebate is actually going to help and create and boost consumption and demand. It's not going to happen that way. If you really wanted to do that, you'd have actually increased capacity and increased outlay for Manrega. Now, Manrega is the flagship program for the country as far as livelihood support is concerned at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, if you were to look at the outlay for Manrega, this is absolutely status quo. On one hand, you have got high inflation. Second, there is no scope or any support for reduction of fuel prices. There is no intervention being made for LPG prices. What essentially you are saying is going to go towards the consumption demand will essentially end up just being traded off against the inflation.
Okay. Mr. Patra, thank you for those remarks and your concern around how this budget may actually end up fueling inflation. Let me also get in Milind Deora, the Shiv Sena MP, who's joining us right now. We'll also go across to Mr. Zafar Islam in just a bit. But Mr. Deora, the complaint that is coming in today from the opposition is that what happened regarding stagnant real wages? The government has been speaking about how the private sector needs to pay higher wages, how there has been a demand from the industry to simplify the GST structure, and there could have been a statement of intent in the budget that they are committed to rate rationalization. What about increasing private capex or giving certain boosts in the budget which increase the flow of private capex? What about long-term growth? How do you think the budget really figures on these fronts?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me, and my good evening and namaskar to both my friends on this panel. Both Dr. Patra and Zafar are my very good friends. Firstly, everyone has some expectation of the other from the union budget, and everyone expects the finance minister of the day to address each and every issue. I think, Parikshit, keeping in mind the global challenges that exist today, please try to understand that globally, if you look at the situation, one is there is a move towards greater robotics, artificial intelligence. There is a potential threat to jobs. Globally, you are seeing governments that want to impose tariffs and potentially initiate trade wars with many countries. In the United States, for instance, they've already imposed hefty tariffs on Mexico and Canada. China is probably next. Who knows what will happen in the months and years ahead with India. In that scenario, keeping in mind that there's global uncertainty, keeping in mind that there are severe political, technological disruptions underway, I think it's important that the government of India protects Indian industry, protects Indian job seekers from these disruptive challenges, and not just protects them, but makes Indian industry and especially MSMEs export ready and globally competitive. And in that sense, I give full marks to the finance minister and to the government for undertaking, in my opinion, a series of measures that in the last year in Parliament, I have raised several times that, in my opinion, are strategic endeavors that the government must aspire towards. One, for instance, increasing credit to MSMEs. They are the backbone of our economy. Today, between 1/3 to 50% of manufacturing jobs are created by the MSME sector. Almost between 1/3 and 50% of our exports come from the MSME sector. Bringing them technology, bringing them access to affordable credit is absolutely critical and essential to make them export ready and be able to compete in a world where globalization is under threat and where tariffs are likely to be imposed, and there's likely to be some degree of trade disputes between India and many other countries that we export to or that we import from. I think a second critical area.
Mr. Deora, do you also believe that when it comes to the economic outlook in the country, the global environment is uncertain? In such an environment, how do we expect the private sector to deploy more capex? How can we export more? Yes, we have this intention of being bigger players in the global value chain. But did you find that outlook missing?
You know the statistics. It's always bandied about on your channel. The fact that in the last 2.5 years, the amount of capex from the government that has gone into infrastructure, which in my opinion is positive government spending. It's spending that leads to a result. It's spending that creates assets. It's spending that creates jobs. Despite doing that, maintaining the FRBM targets, not an easy task, mind you, in any part of the world. So there is a humongous capex play underway right now by the government of India, which naturally kickstarts and has already kickstarted, but naturally strengthens the investment cycle, whether it's domestic investment, whether it's foreign investment, whether it's private investment, whether it's public investment. But as I was saying, few other areas that I think are very, very critical. One is a big growth engine in our country are our cities. Creating a 1 lakh crore fund to essentially incentivize state governments to undertake urban reforms is absolutely essential to boost our growth. A large part of our energy mix is, while it's growing in the area of green and renewable energies, nuclear still accounts for a very small part of our energy mix. Globally, every country in the world, I'm not talking about France, where almost 2/3 of the energy comes from nuclear. If you look at America, if you look at a country like Germany, which a few years ago shut down its nuclear plants, if you look at China, every single country, to cater to the AI boom, is essentially reinvesting in nuclear fission technology and nuclear generation. The Indo-US nuclear deal, which happened many years ago, now is the time to exploit that and to ensure that we have the ability to encourage private foreign investment in nuclear energy. And that, I think, is a huge reform which the finance minister has announced, which in my opinion in the next year will be a critical area of attracting investment and generating clean.
And we've seen some changes, regulatory changes in the US also, which will encourage greater cooperation between India and US in civil nuclear energy.
For your channel, and for your viewers, which I think is very, very critical. And this is something I hear all the time as someone who lives in Mumbai and has represented Mumbai for a long time. If you ask a businessman and entrepreneur, whether they are startups, whether they are micro enterprises, whether they are MSMEs, whether they are large corporates, one thing is common across all. There's a famous saying that no matter who you vote for, the government always gets in. The intent of the finance minister to reduce unnecessary regulation, to relook at and review regulation that is curtailing businesses, to essentially reduce compliance burdens on people, to move from a system where
Okay.
certain agencies could potentially harass businessmen to where they become
Right.
partners and stakeholders in the country's progress. In my opinion,
Okay.
just that statement from a finance minister, I can assure you, counts for a lot. It sends a very strong message to the bureaucracy.
All right.
So I'm
All right.
excited about
Yes,
those
that was an
areas.
important message. And the CA had also said that deregulation and get out of the way are important messages in the government's scheme of thinking. Let me now go across to Mr. Zafar Islam. Mr. Zafar Islam, thank you very much for joining us. Manish Tiwari said some time back, ye Kendra ka budget tha ya Bihar ka budget tha? How would you explain the bonanza, the budget bonanza for the state of Bihar in the budget?
Well, you do a back testing and you'll realize all the opposition leaders have always criticized the budget. It is no different today. You just do a back testing from 2014 onwards. Every year, no matter how good budget is being presented, the world has acknowledged that it's a good budget. But for the opposition parties, it is always a bad budget. They will find some problem over the other, some issues over the other. So in a way, it's okay, perfectly fine with us. So we are not overly concerned about their reaction because we know for sure that they also appreciate the kind of decision which has been taken in this budget, the kind of policy measures which has been taken in this budget. It is another landmark steps towards the Viksit Bharat. The aspiration the Honorable Prime Minister has to have a Viksit Bharat by 2000, to make India Viksit Bharat by 2047. What it takes to become a developed nation, it has to be the basic objective that it has to be a poverty-free nation. The education should be accessible to everyone, the quality education. The disposable income should be for everyone, then have the per capita income in line with the other developed nation, so on and so forth. And if you analyze this budget, forget about this for a moment. I'm not even talking about the bonanza which has been given to the middle class in terms of the relief and tax relief. But what is more important, that the basic objective of the budget encompasses all the aspiration which the Honorable Prime Minister has for India. First, they were very clear that there has to be some policy reforms. So they have undertaken reforms for spurring growth in tax, as far as tax reforms, financial sector reforms, as Milind was talking about, the statutory reforms, and many others, the power sector, energy sector reforms, and urban development reforms. These reforms will definitely boost the growth. And besides that, the disposable income, which now the common man on the street will have, and all the middle class and the service class people, the salaried class people will have the additional income in their hand, will definitely spur growth. There will be spur boost consumption. Consumption will lead to more private investment, and more private investment will lead to more growth to more jobs will be created. So in a way, if you see that it's a very balanced budget which has been presented. I mean, there are many policy decisions which has been taken, which is great and good for the country, but which has not been acknowledged by any of the opposition leaders, because I know for them this only objective is to how to criticize. Let me tell you one thing, that if you just see the July budget, or for that matter, February first budget, we could have easily announced this relief which we have given, but we never wanted to make budget as an election budget. That's why we never announced, make this kind of announcement. It was a plain budget with no stimulus in February, but this time we definitely considered everything after the election, after having won Maharashtra and after
we're completely running out of time, Mr. Zafar Islam. We're completely running out of time, but I'd like to thank Mr. Patra and you for joining us.
You gave too much time to Milind, my friend Milind. You gave too much time to my friend Milind.
Sorry, please come again.
I said you gave too much time to my friend Milind. I was just kidding.
Thank you so much, and good to see banter between the ruling party and the opposition on the channel. We are going to now move on to the next segment that we have for you. Thank you very much, Mr. Islam and Mr. Patra, for joining us. We're now joined by Shashi Tharoor, Lok Sabha MP and senior Congress leader. Mr. Tharoor, thank you for joining us on the program. What's your first reaction on the budget? It clearly focused on consumption and power and putting money in the hands of the middle class. Do you think that the budget on that front, when it comes to consumption, does it check all the boxes?
Look, in the ordinary course, I would have, but the fact is that if you look at the core problems facing this budget, I must admit they've not been addressed. If you've got a job and a salary, yes, you'll be happy that your salary, you can keep a little more of it, even though in real terms, I don't know how much of a difference it's going to make because inflation has eroded the nominal value of your salary anyway. So giving you a bit of a tax break is actually a more modest gain than it might appear on the surface. But having said that, the biggest problem is what happens if you don't have a job. Large numbers of our young people are unemployed. We have record levels of unemployment, record levels of youth unemployment, and record levels of the unemployment of the college educated. There's nothing in the budget for them. There's no reference to unemployment in the finance minister's speech. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that, in fact, last year, the government had actually announced employment-linked incentive schemes in the budget of 24-25. But in fact, they couldn't really make any progress with that. They cut the budget of it from 10,000 crores down to 6,000 and change, and they haven't delivered the job opportunities. So unemployment remains a very big question mark. Second, on the income tax itself, she mentioned there's going to be an income tax bill coming next week. So we better wait for the fine print. We don't know whether it's going to suddenly change, for example, all the deductions and so on and so forth available to taxpayers. Maybe the saving may not be that good after all. We have to wait to see. The other problem is the larger question of the investment climate. You know, the Viksit Bharat goal, which is a wonderful aspiration, requires growth. Growth estimates have come down, as you know, this year from what they were projecting last year. On top of that, we are not seeing any source of additional investment. FDI is leaving the country in droves. Domestic investors are skittish about investing in the economy. 23,000 Indian dollar millionaires have migrated out of India and become NRIs. The concern about the government's weaponization of the income tax, the revenue intelligence, the ED, and so on, is reaching heights that no one wants to comfortably do business in our country. These are very worrying trends. And those are the matters that really need to be addressed. So yes, we get some money in our pockets, but it may not actually change very much at all.
And do you think the government, by sticking to the fiscal glide path, despite the global pressure we're under, has sent out the right message?
First, on the fiscal deficit and the glide path, they've kept changing their numbers every time. I remember the days when Arun Jaitley had confidently propounded a glide path down to 3% of GDP. And that's now not even being talked about. 3.5 was not talked about anymore. Now we're talking about 4.8% this year and 4.4 for next year. But how do we get to 4.4 for next year if we're actually going to be reducing, I think we're foregoing 1 lakh crores in direct tax income, 2,600 crores in indirect taxes. Won't that affect the fiscal deficit? See, it's very easy to announce numbers and percentages, and next year you come up with new numbers and percentages. Everyone forgets what you said last year. So I don't see this as a particularly credible thing from a government whose finance minister 10 years ago talked about a glide path to 3%. So, I mean, this is something we need to bear in mind. Then the second question you ask is very important, and that is the question of the investment atmosphere in our country. There is very little doubt that the government has adopted a strategy that has unfortunately eroded trust in potential investors. I mentioned earlier that we've had 23,000 of our dollar millionaires migrating out and becoming NRIs. I've mentioned earlier that we have seen FDI slipping out of this country, and we've seen, unfortunately, no new improvement in investment. One of the reasons for that is that many potential investors are worrying about whether they can trust the government. The government has an overt policy of helping a few so-called national champions, creating thereby duopolies and monopolies in a number of sectors. So if you or I had the money to invest in one of these sectors, we'd say, but what's the point? The level playing field doesn't exist. It's going to be skewed in favor of these big boys. And if there are arbitrary rule changes to favor the ones they want, to make champions out of them, whatever advantage I may have of either scale or lower costs or whatever will go out the window, so I won't invest. And we're seeing this over and over again in our country, that investment is not growing at all. So at a time when investment growth is not there, How do we generate more jobs? How do we generate more manufacturing? How do we get to more exports? All of these are headline terms in Mr. Sitharaman's speech. But the problem is you're not going to get there without inspiring confidence in investors. How are you going to do that from the basis of what you see?
All right, so sharp political reactions there to Union Budget 2025, and that's going to spill over to the rest of the Parliament session as well. With that, it's a wrap on this special broadcast. Thank you for watching. Our extensive coverage on the budget will continue right here on CNBC TV 18.